What is up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of Swingin' Sunday Scan for Sunday, May the 8th, 2022. Today we're going to be looking at the markets, trying to get an idea of what direction we plan to go in the week to come. We're going to go over some previous ideas we went over in the last Sunday scan, and we have some new ideas that we'll be looking at for the week to come. Please do me a favor, if any of this content helped you out in any way, hit that like button. If you want to see more content like this in the future, hit subscribe, click that bell, and you'll get notifications anytime I put out new content. Let's jump right into the market, guys. All right, we're looking at the S&P 500 E-mini futures, the ES. You can use the SPY, which is the S&P 500 ETF. I prefer the ES because I feel like the chart trades much smoother, and I believe there is more trading information within each candle. Last week, we were basically talking about this 4100 area as a very key level of support. I was preparing for two scenarios. One where we were going to break below here, put in a bounce, and then start getting into shorts on an extension on a bounce with a reversal to the downside. The other possible scenario that I was looking at was a bounce off the support level with an extension, and then again looking at taking it shorts on an extension to the upside with a reversal back down to the downside. Much like the end of last week, you'll remember if you go back this day right here, on that Friday, it put in a wide range red bar that engulfed pretty much the entire range for the week. And it did that after putting in 2 green days, which at that point was the perfect time for the market to finally rally, but it gave up everything. This week, in my opinion, was almost the exact same. It put in 3 green days. One of the green days, after an announcement from the Fed, put in a huge green day. And at that point, I was like, for sure, this is the perfect opportunity for the market to finally bounce off that support level and put in an extension where we can finally get into some shorts. But just like on Friday last week, it put in a huge red day again and engulfed almost all of the trading range for the full week. But on Friday, we put in a tiny little doji bar with a bottoming tail, which again, much like last week, is a bit of a cliffhanger. So I do have to say that my preparation going into next week is pretty much going to be the exact same. I expect we're either going to put in a breakdown with a possible breakdown failure, a bounce with an extension, and with a reversal back down to the downside, or we bounce here and put in a reversal as well. The third scenario, which could very well happen, but would be very much unlike the S&P 500 in the way that it typically trades, would be basically a breakdown and a continuation on the breakdown. That is, of course, very possible, but if you go back and you look at the trading action on the S&P, something like that doesn't happen very often. So last week, I was basically saying that for the week ahead, talking about last week, I was only looking at putting in shorts after we saw a bounce. At this point, because in my opinion, the market has become even more neutral, I will be looking at long and short ideas, because really at this point, I can't rely on the market going up or down. And even more so, the fourth scenario, which we haven't talked about, is basically a lot of chop going sideways, which essentially you want to be pretty even when you're long and shorts in your portfolio if that scenario happens. So I think I'm going to be looking at both long and shorts in the week to come. Quickly jumping into some of my personal open positions. There was a point this week where I was actually completely flat with no open positions. I closed 2 trades that I was in last week, one being RBA. This one went to full target right before earnings. If you've seen some of my previous Sunday scans, I do not like to hold trades that are getting really close to earnings. Sometimes the day before and even sometimes 2 or 3 days before. Unfortunately, I closed this one on, I believe it was the second after that big red move to the downside. So I lost, I think, about 0.3 R by not being patient and waiting. But after that big move, and since it was heading into some bottoming tails, I decided just to close it out for a profit and not take my chances with some potential rocky waters heading closer and closer to earnings. So all in all, RBA took quite a bit of time. We had a bit of a bounce and a retest here, which kind of made us sweat it out a little bit. But in the end, this one did end up going full target and not that bad of a trade. And the other one that I closed out was ATSG. This one had a really good move. I took partial somewhere up in this area over the 32. It pulled back. I was hoping after that pullback we saw another bounce before earnings, but we didn't. So I closed it out somewhere sub 32, probably in the 31 range. Close this one out with time to spare before earnings. Again, this one closed out for a profit. Probably made just under 2R on this one. So not a bad trade. GBX was one that was definitely a nail biter. This one had a little bit of a decent start to begin with. It came and started flirting with our stop, which I thought maybe was going to be a sign of a retest and a bounce from there, but couldn't get the job done. Not a great trade. Would I take this one again? Possibly. The range on this one with the pullback here looked like it had a decent potential to put in another big move up. We also had tons of time to earnings, but this one basically just chopped around and didn't really do anything exciting. So, oh well, on to the next one. Getting into some previous ideas, this is one that I mentioned last week that we stopped out on by a few cents. CPRT. This one ended up going in our direction after being stopped out fully. Nearly went to target here. If it continues, it will likely go to full target. Again, not looking at this in the sense of regret, but looking at this as confirmation of the plan that I've put in place. The thesis behind the reversal strategies that I've put in place do work well. And it's just a simple sign of confirmation. Another previous idea, NBR. This one I did enter in last week. This one is off to not that great of a start. It had a decent bounce on the first day that it broke over this green bar, but has since retraced and is putting in some bottoming tails, which could be a sign of retest, but we'll just have to wait and see how this one does. PTSI, this is one that I mentioned last week as well. This one ended up breaking above these topping tails here, and even though it broke the initial stop thesis, I still like this one, mainly because if we look at the weekly chart, this decline and then retrace with a doji bar that has a bit of a topping tail right here is looking like a pretty decent setup on the weekly. So I'm gonna play this one short on the weekly time frame. So I have an order in for this one, but it has yet to trigger, so we'll see what happens to PTSI. Some other previous ideas, WOW. This one would have triggered on Thursday after it broke the highs of this bar. However, since it was so close to earnings, not doing anything with this one yet. Potentially on Monday or Tuesday, if this one has another entry for me, I might be interested in this one going long. UNM, look at this one take off like a rocket. This one I would not have entered because of earnings. And if anyone is looking at this saying, oh, well, why wouldn't you hold through earnings? Look how well it did. Well, show me a strategy that works with earnings, something that you can measure and optimize. So far, I have yet to meet or hear of anybody have a system to hold through earnings. So my trading plan says not to hold through earnings, and I'm going to stick to that. HALO, this one is heading into earnings, so not gonna do anything with this one yet. I do not prefer to play longs or shorts after retrace that has a blip like this. Usually a blip like this means that the stock was trying to reverse and head up but failed. And typically a failure like that is an indication that it may continue to fail as it continues to decline. So this one, we'll see what happens next week, but I'm not a big fan of how this one's shaping up. MKL, this one was actually pretty decent. I stayed away from this one because of how high priced this stock was. I didn't want it to chew up all my buying power. For me, this one would have triggered at the highs of this green bar, so technically it never triggered. So technically, if I was looking at entering the stock, I could still see an entry here, but again, the buying power I'm going to ignore. PDCO, this one would have triggered for me, however, I am not in it. This one is super choppy for me, and the risk to reward is not great. We'd probably be looking at about a 2R to the top of this pivot at $35. Wasn't a huge fan of how this one traded, and probably won't enter this one, but looks to be on a decent start. STRA, this one is crazy choppy. What it did here last week, putting in a bunch of range trading daily bars, not a huge fan of that. We'll likely stay away from this one. Although this support area looks really, really interesting. If we see some sort of approach to this area with some sort of acceleration, maybe we find another entry down here, but up in this area, what it's doing right now, I'm going to completely stay away from that one. Getting into some new ideas, FTS. This one is not necessarily one that I will be looking at entering in the week to come. It's more of one that has already triggered that I missed on Friday. What's super interesting about this one is it put in a wide range green bar on a day that the market put in a small red doji bar with a bottoming tail. So this one has a clear sign of relative strength. It cleared earnings. We're at a really great support area at $61. This one has been trending really strongly. So the only issue is risk to reward. We're probably looking at 2R to the top of this pivot. But since this one has been pretty keen on breaking through prior pivot highs, I wouldn't shy away from taking partial target at 65 and then taking the rest at 3R somewhere probably around 66 or 67. This one's gone for me right now. If we put in a double bottom retest and we find another entry, maybe I would consider something like that. But at this point, it's gone too far. No entry for me anymore. So getting into some new ideas, it's going to be a mix of long and shorts this week. The first one, BOOM, boom. This one I'm looking at short. This one, basically, I'm looking at a bounce very similar to this one, where we put in an extension and then we head kind of into the blue and red line, which is the 21 and 50 period moving average. Put in some either topping tails or green and red engulfing bars, and then I'd be looking at taking partial or all profits around the $20 area with maybe holding a piece even further. STC, similar to the last idea, we're looking at this short. So far, I like the extension bouncing over the blue line, which is the 21 period moving average. It'd be great to see one more pop and then maybe another engulfing bar or topping tail, and looking for a short, again, down to the $50 area. Depending on how far we bounce, that might be full target. 50 is a pretty big psychological number. Might not want to take my chances at going any further. Plus, if we look at this stock on a monthly time frame, 50 seems like a bit of a glass ceiling for the life of the stock. So it could act as like a support area that we might not want to try to get through. Next idea, again, short RLYB. This is one that we had as an idea in a previous week. I'm showing the previous trade here. This one has history of breaking its pivot lows. Something I like about this one is we have two very large topping tails, both testing the same area. So we're getting sort of like a double top retest around the $11 area. We are pretty close to earnings, but if we can get a decent entry down towards the $7 area, I'd be interested in looking at this one short. Another idea short, ARW. This one is pretty choppy. Not a huge fan of how this is trading. This one also has retraced almost the full retracement length, almost 100% back to the top of this last pivot. That is not a great sign of weakness. However, we see a bit of like a trend line here where these pivot highs are kind of putting in a trend line, which in some sense acts as like a resistance. So we're kind of testing that area again, although in a way we've broken it. If we wanted to draw a true trend line, it would probably look something more like that, which makes this look even less appealing. But again, something to look at. I'll be watching this for an entry and we'll make a decision if an entry comes up whether or not to take it. ESTA is a long idea. This one super choppy. Not liking how wide these bars here, typically near the bottom of where we intend to enter the stock, should have relatively narrower bars than the initial retracement. So the fact that we have some relatively narrow bars here and then ending with a wider range bar is not ideal. More because for a couple of reasons. One, this shows potential sign of momentum to the downside, and then also very important, the risk to reward, since I use the highs and lows of the bars, is gonna destroy risk to reward. Even though the move up to the top could potentially still be 2R, rather it be more relatively narrow than the other bars along the retracement. So not a great idea, but still one to watch. This looks like a possible biotech, so be careful. These tend to move pretty wildly. Look at this move on the monthly chart. Crazy. Another long idea, FMC. This one, again, super choppy. We did clear earnings. We do have a pretty decent support level here. We have a pivot here. There is some congestion on this side, so it looks like the 120 area is a significant area for this stock. So this could be an area where this might want to bounce. We are seeing some increase in volume, so we'll see. I don't like the gaps along the way. I don't like how overlappy the stock is. We talked last week about a stock that had this kind of overlappy trading, and the likelihood of getting shaken out on these types of stock is more likely. So not a huge fan, but if something happened next week that made this one really great, I'm going to keep watching it. Well, I have a couple more ideas, but I think these ones are just super low quality, so I'm just going to show the chart and throw out the name. This one is SEAS, hitting this 200 period moving average line, super choppy, kind of gappy, not liking how sloppy the chart is. EXPO, this one could be interesting, looking at how crazy of a range this one can move in, but this one has been putting in a downtrend for quite a while. So if anything, this one might be a decent one to take a short on a bounce, but look how choppy this gets around the reversal areas. Not a huge fan. JOE, Joe, this one could be a potential for a bounce. However, I don't see any clear signs of support here to help with a reversal. This top is so crazy. It looks like a squiggle. V-tops or even a rounder top is ideal, but a squiggle top, I don't know about that one. Well, that's it for today, guys. I appreciate it if you made it to the end of the video. Whether we break the support on the market next week is going to be very important. That support level is the level that almost anybody watching the stock market is going to pay attention to. So we'll see what happens. Are we going to bounce? Are we going to break down? Leave a comment below. Tell me what you think. If any of this content helped you out in any way, please click that like button. If you want to see more content like this in the future, hit subscribe. And if you want to get notifications anytime I put out new content, click that bell. Trade safe, be well, and we'll catch you on the next one.